All right, we are live. Hi, everyone. Lovely to meet you. Yeah, once again. And first of all, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, wherever you are tuned in from. I've got with me Kyle Simpson here, expert developer, best-selling author, um, and tech leader. And I'm going to be talking to Kyle today about a number of things. We're going to talk about what Kyle's been doing, what projects he's been working on, what he's interested in at the moment. We'd also be talking about what Kyle thinks about the changing trends, evolving trends in web development, what's happening with AI, and Kyle's also going to share a lot of his tips, for web developers, the new generation, experienced developers, and so on. And we're also going to talk about some other interesting things related to what Kyle's been working on. So, if you're tuned in, could you please drop in a note so that we know that you can hear us and see us clearly? Okay, I think I'm going to push on. Um, and then I think we can have some comments coming in the meantime. So Kyle, yeah, we've just got our first comment. Thank you so much, Lalit. Thanks for joining in. Yep. So Kyle, yeah, tell us something about yourself and what your interests are, what you've been working on, basically.
So a lot of people out there will have known me from the You Don't Know JS books, which are now over a decade old, which makes me feel really old. That the first edition came out starting in 2014, so we're 10, 11 years on now. That's how most people will have known me. It spun off not only the books, first and second edition books, but also a lot of my trainings and a lot of my conference speaking. So that represented what I consider to be kind of the second phase of my career, which somewhat began a rather complex transition around the time of the pandemic. For a lot of people, that upended things. For me, definitely, since a lot of my work had been focused on or had been centered around being in person, teaching corporate
Mm.
workshops all over the world and all the travel. And that did not translate to an online experience because nobody wants to sit in a Zoom call for 8 or 10 hours. So I've had to kind of reinvent myself, and so I've been going through the last several years quite a bit of upheaval, figuring out what it is that I am most interested in, where I can draw a paycheck, all of that. And I don't know that I necessarily have that all figured out, but that has been quite a bit of an upheaval. So the last 3 to 5 years have not really been a very clean, linear story of my career progression. But to talk about some of the things that I'm most interested in and I'm most exploring right now, I've become convinced that the web is not going to be able to continue in its current form, where it is more and more heavily centered around the cloud and more heavily centered around the marketplace of our data. And I say our data because I don't think that just because a company is providing a service, that means that they ought to own the data that is created by and about us. But that is how the entire world has shifted, to give that ownership and that control to the companies and to take it away from us. So I say very clearly, I have a very clear, crisp line, if you will, that if you do not own your data, you don't own who you are in the digital space. Somebody else does.
Yeah.
And there are a number of ways that we can characterize do you own your own data. But number one, can you have access to your data on your devices regardless of whether you have an account with those services? And the answer is no. Then you don't own that data. Can
Hmm.
you have access to your data even if you haven't paid this month? And the answer is no. Well, then you don't own that data. I'm not talking about should every company just give everything away for free, by the way.
Hmm.
I want companies to exist. I consider myself to be a capitalist. I'm glad that companies can provide useful services and make money. But what we're talking about here is everything that I've created up until this moment that exists in digital form represents my digital self. Or to put it in maybe more even traditional terms, it's my digital estate. It is
Hmm.
everything that defines who I am in the digital space. And if I were to shut off my Google login or to shut off one of my other online service accounts, I would cease to have access to some or most of that digital estate. Um, Even though I've already paid for it, I've already created it, I wouldn't continue to have access to it. And there's no feasible way for me to take all of that information and keep it locally on my devices, decide what I do with it, decide who I share it with, all of that. And so it's not only that the world has moved to everything is a subscription, you have to keep paying to have access to the same things that you had access to yesterday, but it's also about who owns that information and who gets to
Yeah.
decide what is done with it. Like literally just last week, I saw a news story come across and it affected me, it impacted me that Google Maps had a mechanism where you could keep track of your information as you've traveled around all it's your location
Hmm.
history. Right now some people have that turned off on
Yeah.
purpose, they don't like the spying, but some people who travel a lot like to have that information, like to have a record of where they
Yeah.
have been. And what happened was that Google had been tracking that information for years or decades or whatever. There was a nice rich history, and then for some unspecified reason, glitch on their end or whatever, all of that data was deleted with zero backup.
Hmm.
And when they announced that it had been deleted with zero backup, and they said for some customers they'll be able to restore, and they gave like these steps, and they're like, if you have this encrypted backup running, you might be able to restore from that. But it was basically that's your own damn fault if you didn't do your own backups.
Yeah.
And Google Maps is the absolute perfect example of the cloud that should be keeping all of my data protected. And I
Yeah.
shouldn't have to be backing up from one cloud to another cloud account.
Yeah.
And yet they deleted it, didn't apologize for it, and blamed the users for the loss of the data. That's, pardon my French, horseshit. That's just absurd ridiculousness.
Yeah.
And that is a picture of the world that we have created. I have participated for 25 years in helping to create a web that has absolutely stolen our digital identities from us. And it has lied to us that that's the only way to have scalable business models. It's the only way for the world to be connected. It's the only way for users to have the convenience and the performance that they demand. And that's just a straight up lie. It's a straight up lie that makes rich people fatter and richer. And so if I sound a bit radical, I have been radicalized on this topic over the last few years. And I recently ran across the term data Marxism.
Hmm.
I'm not going to describe myself politically as a Marxist, but from the data perspective, I am 100% a data Marxist, meaning that that data should be ours and that we should own that and we should own the means of production of that data. So it's, if you haven't heard that term, you might Google it and try to compare that to some of the political philosophies that exist. So where that all lands is that I have been driving towards how do we remake the web? in this view that we are needing desperately to regain control of our data and thus ourselves, our digital selves. And the movement that most closely aligns with that ethic is the local first movement. And I've become very active and invested in local first. To put it very simply, local first means that the first place that data is created is on your device, and that becomes the source of authority for that data. From there, the data can also be synchronized, also backed up, also shared, but it always stays on your device as the primary source of authority for that data. And that leaves you in control of it. It leaves you in control of your privacy, in control of your security, who you share it with. And it also implies that we have to stop thinking of software as an ephemeral thing. That's kind of how software is. Like we were a little delayed in starting today because the software and the settings that I had yesterday for all of my setup, my audio and visual, today something about my system said, I don't really like the way that was yesterday. I'm going to update something or change something or flip something.
Yeah.
I can't explain it. But
Yeah.
I could not do today what I was doing yesterday, even though I made no changes, because my system autonomously decided for me something needs to change.
Yeah.
And there's a principle in local first called the long now. I love this principle. It doesn't get a lot of attention, but the long now says if I have a piece of software and I have a piece of data and that works today, it should still work exactly the same 20 years from now. And if it doesn't, we failed as software engineers.
Hmm.
We're not saying that all software can never be updated, but the snapshot of a piece of software and a piece of data that works in that software should not be forcibly taken away from you at some future point because a company decides we no longer like that, we no longer feel proud of that, or we no longer want to let you have that without paying for it. That's
Right.
just it's an abuse of
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
So local first is where I'm at. It's you can see it's where all my passion is, and it's where I'm attempting to carve out a new part of my, if you will, my salaried career to work in this space, to research in this space, to build tooling for local first development.
That's great, Kyle. Thank you so much for that introduction. I think let's continue on from where you picked up about local first. I know you've been talking about local first a lot. You've been posting a lot on social media as well about, as you call it, Web 2.5. Um, so, apart from, obviously data being in the hands of the user on their end devices, what other benefits could local first have?
So let's start first with the user. I always try to put humans first and centered in the conversation. So let's start first with the user. I've just described a scenario of a variety of scenarios by which people invest their time and their effort and literally their money to create information about themselves and to carve out their identity within the digital space. You think about social media influencers, you think about people who create creative arts, whether that's writing or visual arts. You think about people who are programmers and write code that they want to define what contributions they've made to society, and hundreds of others that different types of careers and pursuits that all have primarily a digital footprint.
Hmm.
Um, those folks have put in all of that time, effort, and money to create their digital self, and then they are left to rent it back from the people that own the means of production of that data. And that is where everything has gone wrong because I should not have to keep renting something back that I first created. That's not how it works, right? If it was something wholly brand new, like an artist puts out a song and I want to listen to that song, of course I need to pay for it. But if
Hmm.
I make my own song, Why do I have to keep repaying to listen to my own song? That's the
Yeah.
metaphor I'm getting at, right?
Yeah.
So, what I think is hopefully most resonant with a lot of folks, whether they be technical or non technical, is that if you spend your time, effort, and money to create information that defines your digital self, don't you think that you ought to have full and complete rights to always have access to that and to do with that whatever you will? I'm not here to tell you what it is that you should or should not do with your digital self. You may choose to subscribe to all of those services and share all of that information with them, but shouldn't you have that choice as opposed to a web that does not give you that choice? Another aspect is that users have been trained to believe that they don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy, and that they don't have a reasonable expectation that the data that they own, that they ought to own rather, that was created by or for or about them, that they get to decide how that data might or might not be used. So this one's very personal to me. Going back several years here in the United States, there was a landmark legal ruling that the Supreme Court came out, and they upended over 50 years of legal precedent, which was designed to protect those who can get pregnant, those with uteruses. It's designed to protect them and their rights to choose abortion. Now, I'm not here to litigate whether or not abortion is a good thing. It's a totally different podcast. But wherever you land on the legal spectrum, I hope that you can believe that when this is not theoretical, this actually happened, that there were women in my state. I live in Texas in the US. There were women in my state who were subjected to law enforcement practices, meaning they were arrested and charged with violating laws against those practices. And the way that they were prosecuted is because the government of my state was able to reach in to a service that those women had used to track their menstrual cycles and steal that incredibly personal data and then use it against them.
Hmm.
And I do not have strong enough words to describe how completely abhorrent and absurd that notion is. That something as private and personal as what's literally happening inside of your own body is data that, because you wanted the convenience and the capabilities of tracking that information and getting insights about yourself, that they could then turn around and use that data against you and put you in jail. And that's, again, not theoretical. It literally actually happened, and it's where the world is moving. So, wherever you are on the political or philosophical spectrum, I think everyone agrees that there is some big they out there who is using their data and is selling it. You know, we just saw the 23andMe DNA company. They went bankrupt, and everybody started scrambling saying, oh my God, are they going to sell my data? And then a bunch of other people were like, oh no, don't worry about that. And then, like yesterday, a judge granted them the access to go and sell your DNA data. So, whoever you are and wherever you are on the spectrum, there's some big they out there that has your extremely relevant and valuable and
Yeah.
important personal data, and they're using it against you. They're using it to make more money. They're going to sell you to the highest bidder, or they're going to sell you to the highest government authority that claims that they have the right to come in and know those things about you.
Yeah.
So, whether that's big tech or whether it's government, whether it's this political party or it's this political party, they are using your data against you. And I think wherever you are in that space, however technical or non technical you are, you probably don't like that. And I think that there is only one answer to that, which is to completely upend the system and put the data back in our control. You can still have useful software, you can still pay for it. You just don't have to give them access to that data to use in ways that you did not design. They want it, They'll demand it, and there will be companies that will refuse to ever give you these options. But the local first movement says, let's create different options
Hmm.
that put users back in control of their data. The final point about the user-centric perspective on what they get from this. For at least 20 years, maybe a little bit more now, the web moved into the Web 2.0 space in part because we wanted to start thinking of the web as an interactive platform as opposed to a collection of mostly static information. And I was
Yeah.
part of that. I was part of the dynamic HTML, the DHTML movement in like 2003. And then we got Ajax in like late 2004. And we started being able to update pages without having to go to the dreaded white page refresh.
Yeah.
And we've pushed that, right? And we've seen Google Maps and, Gmail, and we've seen Photoshop. We've seen all of these things start to treat the web as an application platform. Now, what we know about users, again, whether they're technical or not, is that they have some expectations about how they interact with systems in their devices. And
Yeah.
one of those expectations that they have is that when they click an icon somewhere or click something on their device to open an app, that they believe and expect that that app will essentially instantaneously open and instantaneously give access to whatever data already exists. And they also might be annoyed by the fact that it's got a spinner where it's getting some kind of
Hmm.
update, or it's logging in, or the kinds of things like that. But there is an expectation of instant on, right?
Yeah.
I have instant access to the app and instant access to the data. The web has always sold what I contend to be the great lie of the web for the last 20 plus years. It's always sold this notion that we can somehow store all of the app and all of the data remotely out on these servers.
Hmm.
And whenever you invoke that application, reinstall the app instantaneously and download all the data instantaneously and give you an instant on zero install experience, the same way
Hmm.
you have with your banking app or any other app
Hmm.
that you have locally on your device. This is a lie. You cannot have zero install and instant on the way the web currently works. And
Hmm.
users expect that. And part of the reason why the web continues to lose to native is because we continue to try to pretend that that's what we're offering. And we have invented all manner of fakery to try to get around that fundamental law of physics, that
Hmm.
data has to transfer at no faster than the speed of light across thousands and millions of feet of
Yeah.
wires and
And you've got to
wireless
pay for
communication.
that as well.
And you have to pay for that, right? Exactly. So my suggestion is that users already inherently understand the performance benefits of having the data, the compute, the capability already installed. They're willing to wait the 10 or the 15 or the 30 seconds to install the app the first time. And then they say, I never have to wait again. Don't
Hmm.
make me wait again. You can upgrade in the background. You can update yourself. You can do whatever you want. But when I want to access this app, I want it instant on and I want all my data right there. They already inherently believe that should be the case. And to the
Yeah.
extent that any native or web app can't or won't deliver that experience, it's always seen as second class.
Hmm.
So I would say that the only way to actually achieve that is local first, is to embrace the way that native apps have always been and to treat the web as the same. So,
Yeah.
what does that mean? I call that that version of things web 2.5. These principles I'm talking about are a web 2.5 manifesto, if you will. And in web 2.5, we stop relying upon install on every visit web experiences. We install the first time, or when a user chooses, we install the web experience that they've had as an app onto their phone. And there are a variety of ways to do that, from putting service workers and progressive web apps to actually packaging your apps in native shells to literally converting to native apps. So there's a whole spectrum of technologies that we can do this, but I call it surf to install. You can
Hmm.
still surf a web that is driven by ads and search engines. But at some point, a user chooses to look at this experience and say, this is something I care about. It's something I want persistent. I want to be able to keep accessing this thing. I want
Yep.
always active and instant on and zero install. And so I'm going to choose to install it once right
Hmm.
now. And from then on, I want it to always stay updated, just the way all my other apps do. I want it to always come on, and I want to have access to it whether I have internet or not. And that's how the web needs to evolve, is to create this pipeline of experience instead of having web apps that are always cloud centric and that are
Hmm.
always based upon going to a browser and navigating to a domain name. That needs to be the discovery path, but we need to have an upgrade path for that experience to become a web of installed experience. The web is not inherently cloud centric. We've chosen to make it that way, and we've chosen to allow people to get really rich off of making it that way. But the web is inherently the interconnection of data. That's what it
Yep.
is. It's not the web has to be cloud and it has to be delivered in a web browser to be the web. That's just a choice that we made, and it's a choice I think that we should undo. So Web 2.5 stands to say, number one, let's give ownership of users' data back to themselves. Let's give them the choice of how that data is protected and how it's used for and by them and not against them. And let's give them access to that information instantly, always on their devices. Let them be in control of choosing where on that spectrum makes sense for them. If you visit a random website and you didn't really like it or you don't plan to go back, you don't install that. But if you visit a thing day after day and say, I really want access to this all the time, give them the rights and the capabilities to access that the same way they do any other app, right?
Yep.
So, one final thing on the user side. I know I'm talking a lot here, but one final thing on the user side. This is an example I like to give. You have an app on your phone, almost certainly, for your bank or whatever financial institution you use. Maybe it's a credit card, but it's often a bank, right? And it's an installed app, so ostensibly when you go to open it, it instantly starts. It doesn't have to reinstall itself, right?
Yep.
But what is true is that when you open up your app, you don't have your data right away. What you're presented with is a login screen every time,
Yep.
right? Nobody has a banking app that allows them to just have access to their data, because that data they don't put on your device, and they don't put it on your device because they believe that that data has to be more protected and more secured. And it could be protected and secured on your device. They just don't want to. They
Hmm.
want to keep your data out in the cloud. So you have this thin shell of an app on your phone, but it's not actually the data, and it does not count as local first because your banking data is not there. Now,
Hmm.
a lot of people are going to push back and say, well, banking data is constantly being updated. And if I was not given the correct current state of my bank account, that wouldn't help. And I push back and I say, no, that's totally not true. Right? There's a whole lot of reasons why I might want to access all of the banking data up until yesterday.
Hmm.
I want to search through my purchase history or whatever. It's fixed, it's immutable, it's not going to change. So if I've downloaded that data and I was viewing my bank details yesterday, and I open the app today and for whatever reason don't have access to the internet, or they're down for maintenance or whatever nonsense is happening, why can I not see all of the data up until the last point that I had it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So a banking app is a perfect example of where we should be leaning into it, regardless of the technology built. We should be leaning into that data can and should be protected on the device to let me continue to access it. And it's not being done that way. And it's not being done that way in part because they get to hold access to your data hostage. If you get, crosswise with the bank, if they don't like what you're doing, if you haven't paid their fees or
Hmm.
you're overdraft or whatever, they get to say, nope, you no longer have
Yep.
access to your data.
Gives them
So
control. Yeah.
yeah, so everywhere we look, whether it's a website or whether it's an app, everywhere we look, we have to start asking ourselves, what is my relationship to the data that I'm using in this? And if you start asking that question, you will see that everywhere, in every part of your digital life, you don't actually own your data. And I want to put that back in control for users. So I'll pause for a moment because I've been talking for a long time, but that is the three pillars of Web 2.5 from the user perspective. There's a different set of benefits and arguments for local first from the business perspective, because as I said earlier, I'm not suggesting that all business needs to go away and nobody makes money doing any of this. I think there's a very rich set of reasons for how business can be done this way too. But my first and foremost goal is to center the human in the conversation.
Yeah. That's very insightful, Kyle. Thank you so much for that. Um, Whoever's joined us and is listening in, please drop in your thoughts on the benefits of local first development. If you're already doing it or you're already thinking about it at your organization, we'd love to hear about that. So, Kyle, I'd love to jump on to another topic. And I want to ask you, like, web development trends have been changing so much, and even over the last 2 to 3 years, I mean, we've seen such a rapid pace of evolving trends. What do you see, or where do you see the web moving in the next 2 to 3 years? What's the most important thing that's happening right now?
Well, I hope that I'm not going to sound too glib when I would say I don't think there's anything important happening in the web development trends right now. I just don't. I think the entirety of it we should just trash. I haven't seen any advancements in frameworks or tooling or builder approaches that I think has any merit at all. And I'm not saying that in kind of shock value, and I'm not saying that to disparage all of the folks who are building those things, but I am suggesting that over the last several years, almost all the gravity that is pulling all of that talent and all of that attention is pulling us even further down the road of centralizing around the cloud with all of the server rendered components and all of that other nonsense. And I think it all sucks, and I think it all should be deleted and thrown away. There's no merit whatsoever. So hopefully that's clear enough.
Okay. What do you think about AI then?
Okay. So AI is something that I have a lot of thoughts on. I have spent quite a while feeling I was a late adopter, I'll say. I spent quite a while feeling like, oh, this is just another snake oil hype trend and there's no value here. And I was a naysayer on the sidelines. And I'm pleased to report that I have moved a fair bit um, in the direction of embracing some of that. I decided that I wanted to spend some real quality time trying to get to know what it is these tools are going to do or not do for us rather than philosophizing about it in an uninformed and unexperienced way.
Hmm.
So I started paying for a couple of different AI tools and I started using them on a regular basis. Um, I will say that unequivocally, I do not believe in nor do I use um, AI automation tools in my development workflow. I don't do anything where this AI tool is integrated into my IDE and I'm, every keystroke, it's like automatically analyzing things and updating and rewriting my code for me. I don't do anything like that at all. And I don't see myself doing so. I
Is
still
that
treat,
because is it that you've not tried it at all and you don't want to
oh
try it,
no,
or have you tried it and found that it's not really helpful?
I have tried it and I have found that I will not continue to try it. That's what I'm
Okay.
suggesting.
Okay.
Um, so uh, I actually worked for a company. This is several years back, but I spent about 6 months working for a company that provided AI powered autocomplete. So
Hmm.
I worked for a company that did this. I very much have spent time working with these tools, and I do not find there to be. That's not where I find the value in AI to be. Now, I have used AI a number of times, even recently, like yesterday, to help me with my coding tasks.
Hmm.
But I treat it as an out of band research and learning experience rather than as part of my every keystroke while I am building. So I go to an AI powered experience and I bring in some question about I'm trying to solve this problem. And that can be like, I'm trying to figure out why I can't get this CSS layout to work, or I don't know what's wrong with this code, or there's something wrong with my algorithm. But I
Mm,
treat that as like a very trusted person that I would go and ask those questions of. I treat AI like that. It's somebody that
mm,
I go and consult. I take my problems. I spend time explaining my problems to the system, and I ask the system to help me. And that first part is easy to kind of gloss over, but it's really important to me that that is an essential part of the package, in my opinion, is that you need to, as a human, spend time telling the system what it is you're trying to accomplish, as opposed to expecting and relying upon the system to automatically infer your outcomes.
mm,
That's how people are using these automated AI tools, and how we're trying to create agents. And I mean, it's all about how do I automate this so that I don't have to think. And that is not the right way to be using these systems to check us out from our thinking.
mm.
We should be absolutely thinking very carefully, because there are fundamental human processes. I'm going to speak as an educator for a moment. There are fundamental human processes that the computer will never replicate, at least until we start implanting chips in our brain. Right? It'll never replicate the brain waves and the neural patterns that exist, where when we start to explain our situation and our desires and what we're frustrated about and what's not working, it creates connections in our neural pathways, and those connections are permanent connections, as opposed to the ephemerality of AI. It is essential for us to go through that human process of trying to explain what it is that we're doing to someone else, whether that be a physical person or it be a digital person in the form of AI. It is essential that we go through those neural practices so that we
Mm.
build those neural pathways and we actually learn what we're doing, as opposed to becoming slaves to that system, which is, I don't know what it does, but every time I just press this button, it fixes my problem.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't use those tools, because they are attempting to cut out that neural process, which I consider to be absolutely vital.
Mm,
Now, once I am using AI as a side process, as an assistant, as someone for me to consult, I do think there's a lot of merit there.
mm.
But it is important that I, as the human, retain the agency to decide what I put into that system and what I take out of that system. I do not want that system to be like, just click this button and we'll update all your files for you. I just don't want it. I
Yeah.
will never, never, ever, ever in my whole career believe that that's the right way for me as a software engineer to
Yeah.
use AI to improve my work. So I'll give an example. I'm working right now on a system where I have kind of a traditional cloud-based app that's got a traditional API, a REST API kind of approach to it.
Yeah.
And I need to build a secondary version of this app, which has converted from using that REST API perspective to using GraphQL. Now, I
Yep.
know a bit about GraphQL. I've been exposed to it, but I'm certainly not even competent at GraphQL yet. It's still something that I'm kind of learning. I'm
Mm.
absolutely leaning heavily on an AI assistant to help teach me and help me research and learn, how do I take what I've already built in this REST world and convert it to a GraphQL. I'm
Yeah.
sure there's some automated tool that I could press a button and it would just automatically do all of that for me, but I wouldn't learn any of that. And
Yeah.
that's what I want to emphasize to people, is that an AI system should be helping you as the human to learn, not taking away what it is that makes you fundamentally human, which is your agency and your autonomy. It should be empowering and expanding that, not reducing that.
Mm. That's very interesting. There's a lot of new things, new terms that have come up, like vibe coding, for example. And what we've been seeing is a lot of beginners actually think that this is possibly an easy way out. Just get AI to code or build your application for you, and then you probably just look at some of the other finer things. But what would you say to those developers? Like, what advice would you give them in terms of how they should be actually trying to approach, using AI?
My response is that while I understand the attractiveness of vibe coding, the attractiveness of just like get in the groove and just click next, 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 and tweak a couple of things and click next a few more times, and boom, I just have this app or whatever. Um, you you have literally done for the most valuable skill that most of you have, which is your ability to take the creative side of your brain and marry it with the disciplined and logical side of your brain. That's what software engineers bring to the table, is the ability to put those two together. And you've just literally erased almost all of that value, and you've given it over to the computer,
Hmm.
and you've basically said, I'm going to rent back my own neurologic skills from a computer. I'm going to pay them to do the same things that my brain is capable of doing, and I'm going to shut my own brain off. Um, and I think that's about the most absurd thing that anybody could choose to do, simply just for the vibes of like, this feels really cool.
Yeah, and you
So
can't
I,
even
I'm
call yourself an engineer anymore if you do that.
um, I think engineer means that you seek first to understand a system and
Yeah,
later perhaps, solve or build it. And yeah,
yeah.
in that definition, if you don't ever care to understand the system, you only care about the outcomes, then you cease being an engineer. You are a consumer of computing apps, and you might even be
Hmm.
producing your own computing apps and then using them as a consumer. But an engineer, in the most direct and classical sense, is one who understands what system it is that they're building. And the kind of essence of vibe coding is, nah, that's too much of a bummer. You don't want to have to understand any of this. Let the system figure it out, and let it just kind of randomly drop stuff in until something seems to work. That's good enough. Um, and that's going to create an erosion of our critical thinking, our logical thinking, our problem solving skills. Is going to create an erosion of that, and it's going to turn that over to the system. And it's more and more going to be the case that the only way for you to re-access that is for you to pay somebody else to have access to what you innately used to have access to. You used to have that in your brain. You let that muscle atrophy, and you let the machine take over, and now you have to pay them to get back to the same fidelity. That's going to make those companies really happy, because it's going to make them richer, more trillions, more trillions, more trillions. But it's not going to make your life quality any better. It'll make it worse.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's really well said, Kyle. Another interesting thing that I picked up on, you said that, I mean, the way you approach it is you let the AI teach you, things that you didn't know, and then you try to apply that. Um, do you now use AI as your primary learning tool? And do you kind of see yourself using, say, Stack Overflow, for example, a little lesser than before?
I don't use Stack Overflow at all. I completely deleted all of my accounts and history and everything from Stack Overflow about a year ago, in protest of their change to not allow users who had built up their own data. They just released an update saying, we're going to feed all of that into an AI, and we're not going to give you any control over that. And in
Hmm.
protest of that, I deleted all of my Stack Overflow experience from nearly 15 years of experience there. So no, I don't use Stack Overflow at all. And anytime it shows up in a Google search result, I deliberately avoid it. Is AI my primary learning tool? In some respects, yeah, now. Um, what I used to do, and what I think a lot of people used to do when I needed to learn something, is I did a lot of searching, I did a lot of Googling, and I did a lot of correlation of information across various resources. I found a Stack Overflow post and an MDN post and a this and a that and a that. And my brain had to do all of the connecting. And I had to do a lot of trial and error to figure out how to apply. They didn't ask exactly my question, but kind of. And let me see if I could sort of make that work. And that was effective, but not necessarily efficient. What I see AI doing is doing a lot of that correlation work for me. I'm able to ask questions that more closely match what I'm actually trying to accomplish. And it does still give me noise, but I'm able to tell it what the noise was and able to filter it down. So I almost never get the right answer the first or the second prompt, but the third, fourth, or fifth prompt of that going back and forth with the system, I've been able to properly filter it down to where it understands exactly what I need. And it's
Hmm.
telling me that. And it's in some cases now even citing where it's getting that information
Yeah.
from. So sometimes I'll click on those little citations and go out and read the kind of original source material. Sometimes you go read the original source material and it says the opposite of what the AI tried to claim that it said. So it's important to still,
Yeah.
check with the reality. But I am finding a much closer to the metal loop, if you will,
Yeah.
between what it is I need and the way that I can ask the system to help me learn that. And that is probably the single biggest benefit that the LLM approach to tooling has given us, is the ability to understand the way that we as humans communicate through language and translate that into these correlation techniques of pulling disparate pieces of data and bringing to the surface something that is more useful to us. So in that sense, it has become a teacher because it is doing what a human, me or somebody else, used to have to do. It's doing that correlation and that conceptual connecting for me, and it's getting it right, say 60% of the time, and that is opposed to 0% of the time did the Google search used to do that. The Google search did 0% of that, and I had to do it. And now
Yeah.
60% of that inference and correlation and connecting is done by the AI system, which has significantly improved my ability to get to meaningful answers more quickly. I'll just say that I don't Google search something. I didn't go searching for stuff um, at the first step anyway. By the
Hmm.
time I was looking on Stack Overflow or scouring the web for something, it's because I was already in a pretty difficult position.
Hmm.
And that automatically meant that there was less likelihood I was going to find a good match. What AI is able to do is understand, even if nobody else has ever had that exact same scenario, it's able to understand the connections between those disparate sources
Yeah.
and kind of bring me closer to a summary of how those things apply to what I'm working on. So in that sense, it's absolutely become my primary learning source. But I do want to be careful to say that the AI doesn't know anything that's not already out there. It
Yeah.
is able to make connections more quickly and more effectively than before we had AI, but it doesn't know anything um, inherently. It's being
Yeah.
trained on information that ostensibly humans eventually create, or initially
Yeah.
created. So I do still think there's an important human aspect, which is us producing quality content that the LLMs are able to then, correlate for us. So I still think there's a role in people creating high quality technical blogs, high quality technical documentation, because all of that is the food that LLMs are going to crunch on.
Yeah.
And I need those LLMs to crunch on high quality food so that when they help me prepare a meal, it's going to be useful and beneficial to me.
Yeah. Absolutely. In terms of say continuous learning, and evolving with how web development or any kind of development is happening now, what are the three pieces of advice that you'd like to give, especially beginner or intermediate level developers?
The most important advice that I can give you is that your most powerful tool is why. The question why. I I would say that the only thing that I did better than most of my peers that accelerated me in the JavaScript space and allowed me to produce the You Don't Know JS books and all the trainings and gave me that slice of my career. I'm not I'm no longer resting on those laurels because nobody's learning the JavaScript language anymore the way they did 10 years ago. But the reason why I was able to take that slice of time and that lightning strike and experience and exploit and benefit from that is because I was uncommonly good at asking better questions, and importantly, why. Why is that done that way? Why was it designed that way? Why does it work that way? Why does this thing not work like that? Those questions are what drove me further down those rabbit holes and drove me further along that spectrum of getting to know the system. And that's what gave me all of that value that I could then turn into the books and the trainings, which have, you know, been fairly successful from a monetary perspective.
Yep.
Um, so I would tell people that your most important tool is your curiosity and your drive to ask why. And if you don't have that, you can develop that. But if you have that naturally, you should lean into that rather than being sold the lie that these systems are going to do that for you and you should turn that part of your brain off. It's your
Yeah.
most valuable asset and you should lean into that. It is most what is going to make you human and most what is going to continue to bring you value, even in spite of the fact that all of these systems are going to replace a lot of the kind of the menial labor, if you will, of what we used to do as digital workers. A lot of that work is going to get replaced. Some of that's good, a lot of that's bad, but it's going to get replaced regardless. But the way that you keep being useful is you keep using your critical brain as part of the process. If you become a worker whose only job is to click one button and then allow another button to be clicked, they're going to get rid of you and they're going to let the buttons click themselves. So that's my first advice. My second advice is that you should really lean into developing an ethical stance on who you are and what you bring to the systems and what you bring to the system as a whole. You've heard me take some pretty firm stands on things, even in this brief conversation. And there's going to be some people that listen to this and they're like, oh, I just completely disagree with him. He's just totally wrong on that. And that is okay. What is not okay is that we have a generation of people that don't really have any opinions at all. They are essentially being stamped with the opinions of others that have uh, a monetary interest in doing so. So I think it is really important that people, um, almost as an outcropping of the understanding that gets from asking those better questions, that you form strongly held and strongly supported beliefs and opinions on what systems should be built, what we should do. Not all things that can be done should be done. And that is another aspect of your humanity that I think is important for you to continue to lean into. Your autonomy to decide, no, I just am not going to work on building that kind of thing because I don't believe that that kind of thing is beneficial to me, to the people I care about, and to society as a whole. And I don't want people to like be like me. Like, don't have that. If anybody's ever heard me say anything, I hope that what you've said, I hope that what you've heard from me has always been develop your own opinions, own your own path. That's what I've tried to empower people. I do not want a bunch of people to follow after my path because that's mine. I own that. So I'm not trying to create a bunch of people that parrot the same things that I say, but I do think if I have any influence on the rest of us as engineers and us as humans, it is hopefully that I will continue to be the voice of, you need to own that space, if you will, that you take up in the universe. You need to own that. You need to be intentional about that. And it's okay for you to have opinions. You should reject all of the nonsense of like loose opinions, weakly held, or whatever. Like all of that is just total nonsense. It's designed to water things down. It's designed to make you more compliant, to make you more of a cog in a machine. And guess what happens when cogs break? They get replaced. Don't do that. Don't
Yeah.
follow that path, or you will get replaced. And if I have anything, I don't know how much longer I have in this industry before there's there's no need for a person like me anymore. I have started to feel a lot less important to this industry, and it's been a humbling experience to kind of recognize just how little impact I'm making now. Because I had an uncommonly good success at making a big impact, and now I see tangibly how much less that is than it used to be. So I don't know how much longer I have, but I do want to spend all the rest of the moments that I do have doing what it is that we do. I want to spend those encouraging people to keep leaning into what is making them most valuable as a human, as part of the system. That is the asking the questions to understand why the systems are designed the way they are and why they work the way they are, and to be unafraid to question that status quo and perhaps redesign it, do it differently. And then, secondly, to have an opinion and have an ethical stance. I take an ethical stance on data and personal identity. That may not resonate with you, but there are other aspects. And I remember when I was being taught computer science 25, 30 years ago, we took a class on ethics. It was a required class in the curriculum. I'm sure they don't even do that anymore. But there was an ethics class, and I remember us having to wrestle with the questions. If you were working for a boss, and this was literally a scenario that they posed in my ethics class. You're working for a boss, and you're working on a site, and the boss says, this client needs you to be able to to take their, take a customer's credit card information to be able to purchase something. Again, this is almost 30 years ago, or 25 years anyway, long time back, right? So it's different than the way we think about e-commerce today.
Yeah.
But think about the web in the late 90s. What did that look like? It was really primitive compared to what we have now. And so the scenario was, they want you to collect the payment information, and they've decided that to get this project launched as quickly as possible and to validate the idea, they want the customer to send that credit card information over email. So make it
Hmm.
so that once they type in their credit card information, that it emails it to you, and then somebody runs the number and charges them. Will you build that system? They've said to you that this is the only way you're going to get a paycheck, is if you build that
Hmm.
system, because the decision makers have chosen that they're going to cut this corner. They know it's not the best, but they've chosen to cut this corner. Will you participate in that for the benefit of continuing to have your job? And we had to wrestle with that as a group. We had to wrestle with, how are we going to respond to that? And I think that was a valuable exercise. And I'll tell you why. Because I literally experienced exactly that a few years later. I had a client that had contracted me to build them a website, and they literally asked me that exact same scenario. It was
Wow.
crazy that, like, something from my schooling a few years earlier came back,
Yeah.
and I had a client that wanted to pay me to build a system, and I was like, no, we can't. We've got to secure the credit card credentials or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
you can't just take this without security. And he's like, why can't we just do it over email? I keep my password to my email private. Nobody can read my emails. And I refused to build that system for him. He probably found some other patsy to do it, but I refused to build that part of the system for him.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things, I think it's a lost art that we struggle with those things. And I'm not telling everybody exactly what ethical stand to take, but I am telling you that your ability to understand and to take those positions is a critical component that we are kind of giving away, and I think we need to reclaim that.
Yeah. Yeah, really well said, Kyle. And with that, I think we will wrap up this session. It's been amazing talking with you, Kyle, and hearing your insightful thoughts on AI, web development, and also on ethics. I think this is really useful for everyone who's tuned in. So thank you once again. Thanks to everyone who's joined in. I know we had a few questions dropped into chat, but unfortunately, we don't have much time to answer. Probably we'll try to look at those questions and answer them via the comments itself. But once again, thank you very much for joining in. Thanks again, Kyle, and great having you here. Bye bye.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Take care, everyone. Bye bye.